but I don't like vanilla ice cream. Now, like, would they be expected to say, like, okay, well, what's true about the chocolate ice cream that if true about um that if true for the vanilla ice cream, they would like the chocolate ice cream? Like, are they expected to know that in order to be able to form the conclusion that they like chocolate ice cream but not vanilla ice cream?
I mean, I would distinguish preference and belief. So you're talking about preferences, and I'm talking about belief.
Well, they have the preference about their belief. They have
They have a
the
belief
belief
about their
about their
preference,
preference.
you
Yeah,
mean?
sorry, yeah. They have the belief about their preference. So the question is, do they need to know? Are they expected to be able to know what, if true of one, would have to be true of the other for them to not prefer it in order to have the belief that they prefer one and not the other?
Let me think about it. So I say I believe that chocolate falls under this category, under the category of things that I prefer.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that vanilla does not fall under the category of things that I prefer. Is the person expected to identify the traits? I would say no, yeah. So I would also not agree with P1 probably.
Yeah, yeah. Like, there are certain, so it's not true for all cases. Like, there's got to be some cases where, like, that just seems ridiculous to expect that. But then, of course, there do seem to be cases where, like, it would seem ridiculous to not expect that, right? Um, it's like,
Like what?
yeah, like, for example, if I said, like, hey, this group of people, I want to just chop their heads off, right? But, like, this other group of people, I don't want to chop their heads off, right? Like, I think we should. The belief is we ought chop the heads off of this whole group of people, and we ought not chop the heads off of this other group of people. Now, would you say that this person should be expected to explain, what's true of one group that, if true of another group, we would want to chop their heads off, or the reverse? Like, would you say that, or would you say, like, oh, okay, well, that works too?
I would say the reason why I agree with your initial example about the chocolate and vanilla is because I don't think that a person needs to understand the principle that determines their preferences in order to know that one thing is something they prefer, another thing is that they don't prefer. So if you're telling me that the person is saying they prefer to chop the heads off of group 1 and they don't prefer to chop the heads off of group 2, and if you say ought, then this is all that
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah, sure,
mean,
sure. Then
then
I wouldn't say they need to do that either. Yeah, like, if
yes,
they don't need to know, yeah, I agree. They don't need to know why they prefer to chop the heads off one, not the
yes.
other. That's true. But
So yeah,
then, yeah. But the reason it would be asked for that is because it's still, at the same time, like, yes, you could grant they don't need to to do that. However, if that's all there is, if someone simply just has if someone simply is advocating for chopping the heads off of one group of people as opposed to another, and that's where the preference ends. That's just the irreducible, like, hey, I just prefer it, and that's it. I don't have anything further. There's no further fact of the matter.
mm-hmm.
It's valuable to understand that. It's valuable to understand, like, hey, this is actually boiling down not to, like, some utility concern overall, not to some, like, rights concern. It's just boiling down to some preference that's aside from those things. So asking for why one and not the other is useful. It's useful to get someone to get to the bottom of where they're, quote unquote, coming from, like, to where they're bottoming out. Are they just bottoming out in some, like, preference fact
Yeah,
of matter?
but can I interrupt you for a second? I don't disagree that it's
Yeah.
useful to ask a person. The question is,
Mm-hmm.
do we have an expectation for the person to answer this?
So is the question, do we have an expectation for the person to? I think we typically, and to answer what exactly? To answer why they
To
have the.
identify the traits. So this is the second part of the first premise. It is expected to identify the traits true of X that if true of Y would make Y fall under C.
And that trait could just be if that trait could just be like I have that preference, sure. Like and in that case, if we include that, then sure, I would say that for both cases. Then like it's just like the expectation is when we say that expectation word is doing a lot of work here. Like the expectation point is just that there are certain things that we tend to care deeply about if someone says something or if someone advocates for something, and we care about where it's coming from more than another mundane case. Like if someone has ice cream and they say they prefer chocolate and vanilla, like you know, if like there was a whole bunch of lives on the line about chocolate and vanilla, like yeah, we would care about that too, and we would ask what's true of the chocolate if not true of the vanilla, and we would want to know if that's coming down to some bottoming out like just personal preference, or if there was some rights violation there or something like that. If that was the same case, but there are other contexts where we're like, hey, we actually really want to know this. Um, that's all the expectation, that quote unquote expectation, is coming from. It's just coming from like, well, we want to know where that's bottoming out. When you say, I prefer to chop the heads off of all these people. I don't prefer to chop the heads off of all these other people. It's just that we're more interested and we're more concerned with why that individual, where that individual is coming from when they say that. Is it just the preference that they're going to be an epistemic particularist about? Is there some sort of further principle they're appealing to? What is it? Because it seems very like mundane and something we don't care about when someone is talking about chocolate and vanilla. Like, okay, be an epistemic particularist about it. Who the fuck cares? Like, okay, great, enjoy your chocolate, enjoy your vanilla. But there are certain other things that we care about, and we're interested in knowing why. Because we believe there are other people that are going to believe that there's going to be a lot of like concern over it. There's going to be a lot of consequences over it. And so that quote unquote expectation word that's there, that's doing a lot of work here, it's just that's all that's reflected.
So you're saying that the second part is true only if there's a concern, if there's a certain severity to it, because what we are talking about has severe consequences depending on how we conclude that X or Y is or is not in the category.
Yeah.
Okay, if this is the case, then I would say that for both the question of whether a cow falls under the category of moral consideration or whether a specific person falls under the category of being male or female, or woman or man.
Yeah, I agree
think
with that.
both these things have a severity that would warrant the expectation, or they
I
don't.
agree.
So
No, I
I'm
agree.
agnostic. Actually, I'm agnostic. So
really,
I'm not saying that I have an opinion on this. I'm just
no. I
trying to figure
agree.
out what your opinion is.
So I agree with that. But you agree. Presumably, you agree that the chocolate and vanilla case is not in the category of severity.
Sure. Yeah, I can agree with that.
Okay, cool. So still, you agree that P1 is false.
I'm agnostic on P1, but you gave a good argument.
Well, P1 says for all, right?
Yeah. I was initially agnostic on P1. You gave a good argument. It doesn't apply to vanilla and chocolate, and so P1 is false. That's true, yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then the question is just like, okay, so in the case of the man and woman, and so I do think it is concerning. There's a lot of concern around it. There's a lot of utility concern around it, and so I actually, in that case, I'm going to give the same answer. I think there is a concern. When someone says like this person's a man or this person's a woman, there's people who have caused a lot of suffering when they say certain things like that, and so yeah, I mean, I think in that case there is a concern, and that forms an expectation. We're interested in knowing why they're saying these things. In the same case with the cattle. So I'm going to give the same answer in both cases because I think they both fall under this category of like this, concern for a bunch of consequences.
That would be consistent, but I was in what I wrote here, I was referring to conversation that Ask Yourself had with this guy, first name, last name, and the guy ask yourself why he has this expectation when it comes to name the trait, but he doesn't have that expectation when it comes to identifying the specific traits that make a man or a woman. And then he asks then ask yourself, is there any inconsistency in my view? And I was trying to point out the inconsistency, or rather, ask yourself, is affirming or rejecting these premises in order to, get a better understanding of whether there's an inconsistency.
Okay, so I wasn't there for whatever conversation you're talking about there. So like, I'm not privy to what happened in that conversation. I don't know the details. So maybe, yeah, I don't know.
So if ask yourself is of the same position, that there is an expectation, if someone makes the claim that some person is a woman and another person is not a woman, that there is an expectation to identify the trait that makes the one a woman and the other not, then there is no inconsistency. But it feels to me that from the videos that I've seen, the ask yourself does not hold this view. So it would be nice to hear from Isaac if he.
Yeah, sure. I would just say, like, in terms of my view, just to clarify, in terms of the expectation thing. Yeah, I think like I have like this idea of what forms this quote unquote woman and quote unquote man. It's like most of it is like certain characteristics that are internal desires. And I would say that like when someone says they're a woman or when someone says they're a man, I just take that to be like this heuristic, this epistemic proxy, like this idea that, okay, well, I take people at their word. And so if someone says they're a woman and someone says they're a man, what I think is going on is I think they have those characteristics. I think they have like the characteristics that are, on my view, forming the categories of different genders. I could be wrong about that. It's just like this inductive, heuristic that I'm using when I take people at their word. And so that's going to be the categories, and that's why I say that this person's a man, this person's a woman. Yeah.
But again, you are alluding to the general principle of how one can figure out, in principle, whether someone is a man or a woman. But if I would ask you, and I wrote here, I feel uncomfortable taking a specific person, but I don't see a way around it. If I would ask you, is on your view Demon Mama a woman? And you would say yes, and I would ask you. Sorry?
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay, and is Isaac a man?
Yeah, my answer would be yes.
Okay, then I would ask you, what is the trait that is true of Demon Mama, that if true of Isaac, would make Isaac a woman?
Yeah, so what I think the traits are is that Demon Mama has certain characteristics, such as like internal inclination. She has like certain, she desires to be treated certain ways. She desires to look a certain way. She desires like et cetera, et cetera. She has all these characteristics. And if Isaac had those same characteristics, like if Isaac had the characteristics of wanting to look like a prototypical female, if he had the characteristics of wanting to be treated like a prototypical female, if he had the desires to interact with society in the way a prototypical female would, et cetera, all down the line, then yeah, I would say that Isaac is, I would conclude that Isaac is a woman as well.
Okay, but you see that you're not giving me the exact traits. What I need is a set of propositions so that I can run the reductio that you are running on a guy who names a specific trait. Sorry?
What do you mean? What am I not giving you?
I need specific trait. I need a set of propositions, and preferably one which is not self-referential. I don't know what you mean by
I didn't
female.
give you any self-referential. No, female is not self-referential.
Prototypical female. No?
Prototypical female is not self-referential either.
Now, when we're looking to figure out what a woman is, and I presume you say a woman is a person of female gender.
No, that's not what I mean. I'm using man and woman as gendered references, and I'm using male and female as sexed references. It's not self-referential.
Sorry, female and male are sex?
Are in reference to sex, and man and woman are in reference to gender.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So what you're saying is a person is a woman, so a person is of female gender if it has sufficient characteristics that are typical of a person of female sex.
Yeah, with a heavily, and you could weight those characteristics differently than you like. I personally like weight those characteristics more in like internal inclinations, like mental characteristics. But yes, it's definitely not self-referential. It's indexed to biological sex.
Of course, no. It's okay. I concede that it's not self-referential. I thought you were using the term. Yeah. But okay, so.
And also I've given you propositions. Like it's not like I haven't given you traits. Like I've given them to you. Like I've said, okay, look, like just to name one. I mean, I could keep going down the list, but I said etc. because I take it that you know what the kind of propositions I'm talking about. But I could continue. Like when I say, so Isaac prefers not to look like a prototypical female. So that's a proposition, is it not?
Of course, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and if I say Isaac prefers not to be treated in the same way a prototypical female would be like to treated in a society, that's a proposition, is it not?
Sure, but here's what I would need from
And
you.
if
I
those
would
were
need
true,
a precise set of propositions such that I can run the reductio, such that I can think,
okay.
okay,
When
what
you say
if?
precise, when you say precise, do you just mean that there can't be vagueness in it? Or do you mean that there can't be any sort of like, what do you mean when you say precise?
I mean, okay, maybe precise is not the right description here, but you were alluding to a whole set of propositions or a whole set of traits, but I would rather have it spelled out in form of a list. This is what I mean by precise.
Okay, so that's not something that that's not something that that NTT is expecting. Like you don't have to have the exact list in NTT. Like it doesn't have to be an exhaustive list. It's just all you need is enough to understand that one is in one category and the other is in to understand why one is viewing one in one category and the other not in another category. Like we don't when NTT is run, like we're not expecting, maybe some people run NTT do, but we're not actually expecting like, okay, well, you need to give me every proposition that is true of like human and not true of the cow. That if it was true of the human, not true, like you can just name enough such that you understand that if one was true of the other, not instead of the reverse, that yeah, you would conclude one way or the other. Like I'm not expecting like this whole like exhaustive list between humans and cows. Like that's not what we're doing either.
No, you're not the whole list that makes them different. You are looking for the specific traits that are relevant, whether they fall into the category of model consideration or not.
Yeah. No, but yeah,
so
more,
this is a much smaller set, of course.
Wait. Yeah, but even that, I'm not like I'm not, because like someone can have like all these like considerations that are characteristics that are like that are not going to be that could go on like hundreds and hundreds of them, like that would fall under their moral consideration. Like I just need enough of them to understand, to get into my head why they're putting one in the moral consideration category and the other not. Like, and then I'll stop. Like I don't need like a full exhaustive. Like if someone says like, well, I consider humans valuable because they interact in a free market, and that has some beneficial externalities. And I also consider humans valuable because they can become doctors and treat patients, and that has some good utility. And I also consider humans valuable because they have sex for pleasure, more so than other animals do, and that contributes to utility. And I also, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like I get the fucking picture. Like I can infer what the other like propositions were. I'm not going to ask this person to go on ad infinitum, right?
Okay, but how do you? So you're saying NTT is just basically to understand for yourself where a person comes from, rather than an argument to show some inconsistency. So you're not saying the purpose is not to run the reductio.
No, that's not what I'm saying. No,
okay,
I'm
then
saying,
explain please how you run the reductio.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Like, as long as like here, look, if it turns out that that the reductio doesn't go through, it means that I actually probably haven't understood all the characteristics, and so I shouldn't try to save myself time, and then I would actually go back and ask for more. or if the inconsistency doesn't follow. If it turns out that later in the line, I didn't understand, I'm concluding something about their position that they're not concluding, right? Then I would say, okay, fine, let me go back and let me ask for more characteristics, let me get more clarity. But I'm not going to atomize every single thing in the initial outset, in my initial run through. Like, I think if I'm confident I have enough, like I have enough of what this person is talking about to understand why, on this person's view, one being is in one category and one being is in another category, or really like where the characteristic drops off of moral value. Like if I just get the first instance where the characteristics drops off, or even if it's gray and I can have the first overdetermination of where like the property of moral value drops off, like that's good enough for me.
But I don't understand what you mean by good enough. Good enough to run the Reductio?
That's good enough to run the Reductio. Yeah. That should be good enough for me to either run like a consistency checker or a Reductio. Yeah.
Right. So, but in order to run the Reductio, what you would have to do is you would have to identify a being that does not have all of these properties, but has presumably still moral value to the person, right?
That does not have, yeah. Well, what I would have to, well, I don't know if that necessarily is true. I'd have to think about that. Like, because you can have not all the properties, and you can say one way or another. Basically, the way I'm viewing it, here's how I'm viewing it. Like, someone can have like this idea that these things are vague predicates, right? Someone can say like, okay, well, it's not like necessary or sufficient criteria. It's more like a cluster concept in both cases. Like, someone can say like gender is a cluster concept, and moral consideration is a cluster concept, where it's not the case that any individual criteria is necessary and sufficient. And in that case, what I would just want to know to form the Reductio or to form a consistency check is to say, okay, well, give me the first case where it's clear to you that it isn't to the best of your ability. Like, ballpark it. I wouldn't say like, because the threshold could be
Sorry,
gray.
what do you mean by first case? You mean they should point out a specific object?
Or they should. Yeah, in the series of possible worlds between like the human and the cow, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be some gray area about where moral value drops off. They can have that view, and I would say, okay, fine, but just give me like, to the best of your ability, give me the earliest case where you think you have a high credence that moral value is not there.
So how would you run a Reductio if this guy is simply saying, if this guy is describing a being, what would be the Reductio? All you can say is, well, that is absurd.
I can give you an easy example.
Okay.
Well, I can give you an easy. Yeah, I can easily give it to you. So, like, for example, that all depends on where that high credence ends up being. So, if someone says, well, I actually have, there's a bit of a gray area, but I have a high credence that this individual does not have moral value when this individual is a human with a cow tail and enough cow spots. Like, if they have, I'm not sure it's gray if they have like, 5 cow spots or colorings or whatever. But if they have like 20, like, that's like outside of the gray area for me. That's a high credence. I have a high credence that the being has value, does not have value. And then what the Reductio, on my view at least, would just be that, okay, well, what turns on this being having value to be killed or not killed for a burger is just going to be whether they have 10 spots, or whether they have whether they have 20 spots, or whether they have 5 spots, cow spots. And that's enough for me. Like, it all depends on where they set the difference between the like gray area and where they have a high credence.
So it seems the Reductio is that you simply reject the continuity axiom. So
wait, what? What do you mean?
So continuity axiom basically says, on the one end of the spectrum, let's say something is the case, on the other end of the spectrum something is not the case. So as we go from one end to the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum, there must be the exact point where we go from one case to the other case.
No, that's not what I'm saying. No. That's
no. This is what you're rejecting. No.
No,
So if this guy says this is the exact point, what it would be the reductio in saying, but wait, if we go 1 millimeter to the right, this is not the reductio. This is simply rejecting the continuity.
No, so I don't take a view like, so I'm not. I think I'm. By the way, I do think I'm epistemicist, but like I don't take a view. I don't actually have a strong view about epistemicism or not. Like, what I'm saying is going to be compatible with either view you take on continuity here. The reductio is just going to be something I find like when I say reductio, I just mean like reductio is a broad category. It doesn't necessarily mean a contradiction or anything like that. It could just be something that I find ridiculous. Like if I find it ridiculous, that's why I said it's a reductio on my views.
I take a reductio to only mean something is ridiculous.
On everyone's view or on my view?
I mean, of course, you have different standards of absurdity, but the idea is to convince a broader audience and not just say, well, this is absurd to me, therefore you're wrong.
Well,
it should be something that applies to most people.
I'm saying it's absurd. Well, I'm not saying it's absurd to me, therefore you're wrong. I'm just saying it's absurd to me, and therefore I'm going to have a hard time taking on a view like that. Now, I have intuitions that the audience will share my sense of absurdities about this, but but even if they didn't, it would still be hard for me to take on a view like that. So what I'm saying, all I am saying, so here's what I'm not saying. What I'm not saying is that I'm rejecting that, there could be like some point where the difference lies. Like there could be, I'm not rejecting that there is a threshold where like moral value drops off or not. Like, in fact, I actually think there is, just not that threshold.
Below the count, you mean?
Yeah. Like, I actually do think there is. Of course, I'm not rejecting continuity. Like
there must be, of course, yeah.
Of course, there's a threshold for me too. It's just the reductio is just in the difference in where we're setting our thresholds. Like I set my threshold far, far lower than where this other individual is, and I think it's ridiculous to set the threshold much, much higher. That's all.
But then all you could say is point at the cow and say, "Wow, it's ridiculous that you don't give it more consideration."
Well, no. What I'm saying that's very misleading. No. So what I'm saying is,
no, I'm saying this is all you could do. This is all you could do. This would have this exact same strength.
No. Like again, like what I'm saying here is that it looks very ridiculous for someone to have a threshold at the number of cow spots. So if you say, okay, well, you have where the point turns is where this person has.
I see. You say, yeah. You see that the point is the cow spots. The cow spots itself are the relevant criterion. This is they're
not necessarily they're the turning point. The turning point here is like you can have someone who has the same mind, and what's turning on whether they're going to be killed or not is like whether they have 5 or 10 cow spots. If that's where your turning point threshold is, that sounds ridiculous to me, and I think most people would find it ridiculous too.
I see your point now. Yes, okay. So it's about the exact trait we're talking about, where it turns, and not just that it turns at some point.
Yeah. It's about where that threshold is in relation to the properties that they're giving. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out how I could run the reductio with gender based on the traits.
I can give you an example. Yeah. Like I can give you an example.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's say, let's say Demon Mama, right? Actually,
I know it's hard. I don't want to talk about her too, but random
I'm
trends.
Sorry, because I know because there's like there's gonna be some kind of blowback and everything. It's just like no.
Yeah. Random trans person.
Yeah. Like I'll choose Isaac because I'm friendly with him. Like
okay.
Or at least much more friendly with you. So like let's say Isaac one day had one feeling for like a fleeting second, right? Like he had like this feeling like, hey, maybe I should try this dress on, right? Like but everything else, all those other properties, were the same. Like all those other like he still wants to act in the way that's prototypical for a male. He still wants to be treated in society the way that a prototypical male would be treated. But one day, for a brief period of time, he had this desire to, in some way, look like a prototypical female in the sense of like wearing a dress for a little bit of time. Now, I would view it as a reductio if someone said Isaac is a woman, if that's where their threshold is. Like they can have a threshold where like, okay, well that's it. Like the threshold is so high. Like if a male has this one property, has this one characteristic where they turn on, and what turns on that is that, and everything else, even though everything else is the same, then yeah, I would view that as a reductio. Like that's your turning point. If someone tries a dress once, like or something like that.
Okay, but I want to run the reductio on you, so you have to tell me your turning point.
Okay, like fine.
I mean, I just want the same expectation that you have for
hold
the
on,
carnist.
but that's fine. No, that's fine. I can. That's totally fine. Like someone can have like in terms of my turning point for, it's going to be pretty broad. Like because I'm going to have a lot of gray area. Like
where you put a lot of credence.
But I can give you. But I'm going to give you. Yeah, but I can give you like the cases where it's obvious to me, or with the cases where I have a high credence, and that's fine. I don't think there's going to be that many reductios on my view, if any. But all I'm doing right now is giving you an example of how one could run the reductio if someone has a threshold set where I would run a reductio. That's all. I'm just telling you, like, okay, well, in the case of the cow, I can give you an example of someone having a cluster concept with a threshold, where the threshold they're setting it at, indexed to the given traits they're giving, looks ridiculous. And I can do the same thing for gender. That's all. I'm just telling you how I would run the reductio for someone else. Now, someone could try to run it on me. That's totally fine. I invite them to do so.
Okay, but there is so the two examples that you gave are not symmetric, because in the case of the in the case of Isaac having this one fleeting thought, here it is not that you're rejecting that the trait itself should play a role, because I think you would agree that having this desire to be perceived as a prototypical female is in fact an important trait. You just say the exact threshold is comically low and it should be higher. No?
Oh, that's fine. I could do the same thing as well for the other case. Like, so for example, I can say that someone has. I can say, well, this the characteristic which is morally of moral consideration is sentience, and I can say, well, if someone is just a little bit less sentient, like, let's just say that someone gets into an accident, and if Isaac got into an accident, and he lost his his ability to see wasn't as well, and so he has less perception of the world. He has less experience of the world. Still has a lot, but it is less. And he feels he doesn't have the ability to experience the world as well as he once did, because of that. He still enjoys his life very much. He still experiences love and everything like that, but his experience of the world is a little bit less than what it was before. Now, if someone drew the threshold there and say, okay, well, you know what, my threshold is there, now it's okay to kill Isaac, I'm going to give the same reductio. I'm saying, okay, well, if that's your turning point, at that point, I'm going to consider that a reductio because of where you're drawing your threshold. And I am going to say
that the reductio usually refers to an argument and not simply pointing at what the person said and say, well, that's ridiculous.
Wait, hold on, what?
A reductio ad absurdum refers to an argument, okay? But what is going on here is that the person says, look, this is a object that I would not give moral consideration to, and you're pointing at it and say, well, that's ridiculous. So I would not call this a reductio.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Well, no, what I'm saying is, by reductio, I just mean that I'm saying this is what follows by what someone's view is. Like, if you say this, here's what follows, and then you are pointing.
What follows from that? What follows from the guy saying this specific Isaac without his full sight, I would not give more consideration to. What follows from that?
No, I see. No, here's what I'm. No, so like I went to the end because I thought you would like. Okay, so it's okay. I'll explain. So if someone says my threshold for moral consideration is, so let's say my threshold is at 100, right? My threshold for moral consideration is at 100. Like, let's just call it sentience points, right? And that just happens to be at like a very high functioning level. Like, say my threshold is at a very high functioning level, right? Now, if you are just below what I'm defining as this very high functioning level, then I can chop you up for a hamburger. Now, what I'm saying, what follows from that, if someone were to say that, what follows from that is if Isaac lost his sight, then we could chop him up for a hamburger. Like, that's one of the examples I'm giving that follows from what I'm saying, and that's the reductio. That's what I'm saying is absurd. Like, if you say this, then this follows, and that's absurd.
Okay, you're applying the principle to a specific instance. I see. Yeah, okay, that would count in fact as a reductio. Yeah, okay. So back to the yeah, but still I want to run reductio on you. Holding you to the same standard. So what is the exact point, not the exact, but what is a turning point where you would say you have much credence for someone being a female or a male? Gender, woman, man, sorry.
Yeah. I would say that if the overwhelming majority of this individual's internal character inclinations and their desires lean a given way to, and I can like list out those desires, but I think given what I've listed, I think you understand what I'm talking about. But if their internal desires leaned in favor of those gendered characteristics that I described to you. So if the overwhelming majority of an individual's mental characteristics, such as having the desire to be treated in the prototypical way of a given female, if they're if they desire to look the same way as a prototypical female, if they desired to be if they desired to interact with society the same way a prototypical female would, if they desired and we can even add self ID. We can say if they desire to call themselves by things that that a prototypical female would, or something like that. Yeah, I know that's not self ID, but et cetera, et cetera. If the majority of those characteristics leaned in favor, I would say overwhelming majority of those characteristics leaned in favor of the prototypical female side, then I would have a high credence that this individual is a woman.
Okay, so let me try the reductio. So let's say there's Ali, okay, and Ali lives in a repressive country where people with gender dysphoria or people who don't abide by gender norms are being tortured and killed. And Ali has all these desires, but from the outside, he behaves, he dresses, he looks like a stereotypical male. Then you would say Ali is a woman.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think so. Like, that's just a woman who's pretending to be a man because they're in a repressive society, for sure.
Okay, so physical characteristics are not necessary.
So they are. So here's the thing. Like,
I know they play a role. I asked specifically, they aren't necessary. So purely mental states can.
I would, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. You asked me the question. I'll elaborate. So if someone is like on an equal footing in their mental characteristics, like that's going to be an easier case where like physical characteristics can shift one or the other. They do play a role. They play a minor role for me. But like, wait, hold on. Whoever's trying to talk, pandemic, mute your mic. So yeah, like if someone is like, let's say if there was like, and I think I don't think that's a reductio. I think you would even agree with me. Like, let's say there was this female who is, like afraid of like being in Saudi Arabia or something like that, or whatever country. And they want to do other things. And so they grow a beard for themselves.
Sorry, female, you mean biological female,
even on someone's, even on someone's view, like even on someone's view where because what you told me, that you gave me a scenario where someone is behaving a certain way in society. So I'm just pointing out that even on someone who thinks like gender is just sex, they wouldn't like consider that a reductio, because like if someone is a female in terms of sex and they behaved in a way that is male in terms of society because they were afraid of being tortured or whatever, they grew a beard, they put a beard on and they cut their hair short, and then they, et cetera, et cetera. They would also consider that person to be a woman, who's just pretending to be a man because of certain fears. And so would I. Like, that's not going to be a difference where I
Yeah,
would
but
even
that's not my
disagree.
view. I don't think that
Yeah.
gender and sex are the same. I think gender is a concept different from sex. But I see how,
Okay, but
someone who
either
would
way,
hold this position would also say this person. They would,
yeah,
yeah, they would coincide.
yeah,
Yeah, your view and their view would
yeah,
coincide. I see. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And so I think like even like I just don't find that to be a reductio. Like if someone does have all these like mental inclinations that are in line with what a prototypical female would desire and want and have their goals and everything like that, but they just were afraid of being tortured to death, so they put on a beard and they chopped it, and they chop their hair off to like have their hair short and whatever, like, and that's how they're presenting themselves. Like, okay, well, yeah, they're just a woman who's pretending to be a man because they're afraid. I don't think that's a reductio. I
I
think
mean,
that's like,
the
yeah.
problem is that we cannot directly observe mental states, and so you would
Okay,
have
but
to.
wait, now that's an
No, no, no.
epistemic. That's
I know what you're gonna say.
like,
I know what you're gonna say. A person that has this desire, and there's no reason for them not to, live out that desire.
no, that's not. Even that's not what I'm going to say. Even
Okay,
that's not what I'm going to. Like,
then
I'll
hit
make
me.
that. I'll say that later. But like the point I'm making right now is that what I'm talking about when I form this. So both in NTT and in the case of the gender thing, what I'm asking is the in principle thing. Like, so for
Of
example, if
course, no, no, no. Of course, this is not what I'm contesting. It was just a further point. No, of course.
okay, okay, cool. So we agree that yeah, that's not going to be a disanalogy between NTT and like the gender thing. Okay. Yeah, because I'm asking the in principle question in both cases. Like, if we knew all the
Yeah,
facts in both cases, would moral value drop off? If we knew all the facts in all the cases, would we consider this person a man or a woman?
of course. Whether the proposition can be, I don't know,
Mhm.
validated or something has nothing to do with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, I mean, I agree that there's like going to be propositions that we may not know about and may have a very hard time knowing about it. Like, I'll grant that, sure.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So for now, this has been resolved. I
Hmm.
see how you could apply the same standard or how, yeah, how you do
Okay.
apply the same standard to entity and the gender question. Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Good talking. All right. Bye.
Bye.